Hello, welcome back to my channel. There's something you need to know about my household. Halloween starts on September 1st, which is why when I stepped foot in Dollar Tree and saw these stackable pumpkins for only $5, I knew I had to put my twist on it. Or better yet, a Tim Burton twist on it, because who doesn't love Tim Burton's classic style, especially for the Halloween season. The first thing I knew I had to do was break up the shapes of the pumpkins a little bit, since it was way too uniform, and I wanted to find more interesting shapes so that I can create characters out of them later. I started with the bottom pumpkin, the biggest one, because I knew I wanted that one a little bit shorter and a little bit stouter. So I went at it with a knife at first, and that didn't work. Almost stabbed myself like 3 times. So I moved on to scissors, and I cut out a piece all the way around the circumference of the pumpkin, all the way through, of about maybe ½ an inch. And I put the pumpkin halves together again. And I needed to figure out a way to stick these pieces back together, and I decided to use my heat gun. I knew I could probably melt the pieces together and stick them together that way, and I can go in with the middle pumpkin and the top pumpkin and melt them a little bit to change their shape, make them a little bit more interesting. I started this inside. Don't do this inside. The fumes are crazy. Probably took off 3 years of my lifespan, even though I only fired it up for like 10 seconds in my house. So I moved outside. And I didn't really have a plan for these pumpkins. I knew that I just wanted to find a more interesting shape, still keeping it organic. I honestly kept melting until a face in my head started to form of what this character was gonna look like. This is what I settled with. And then I took it inside, set it down, and took a picture, imported it into Photoshop, and started designing. I had many references in mind for how I wanted these characters to look. I knew that I wanted to have some eyes be similar to that of some of Tim Burton's famous characters like Oogie Boogie. My top pumpkin, you can probably tell, was very inspired by Oogie Boogie. Other than that, I did just try to have fun with the shapes. I didn't use this as a very serious character design session. I kind of just had fun with it, what I thought would look funny, quirky, Tim Burton-y, and something that was just all around interesting to me. And I did not let myself stay confined with the shape of the pumpkin beneath, because later I'm going to go on top of it with homemade paper mache clay that I'm going to show you how to make. And this is the design I was happy with. I thought it looked pretty whimsical, pretty Tim Burton-esque, and all around a lot more interesting than the original dollar store pumpkins I started with. And now the paper mache clay. First off, I chose to use this because I really wanted to keep this budget friendly and to use things I had around my house. It's also an air dry clay and it dries really solid. So I think it's good for beginners if they want to start sculpting, but they don't want to spend a ton on clay and materials. I am not going to be listing exact measurements of this paper mache clay because the recipe is from ultimatepapermache.com. It is a recipe made by Jonny, a wonderful sculptor that you can check out on YouTube. But I will link the recipe down below and I'll show you how I made it in my home. This is a glueless clay recipe. And I chose to use that because glue is pretty expensive, even if you did buy it at the dollar store. And I wanted to use something I probably had in my pantry already. So you're going to need cornstarch, flour, sugar, and vinegar for this first part. You're essentially going to be cooking glue. I dumped that all in a pot and I cooked it on low heat until it became a blob. I kept stirring the entire time until it started to come together in one mass, one sticky mass. And this took about 2 minutes on the stove. Once you have a sticky mass, you are going to leave that behind to cool, and you're going to start on the toilet paper mixture. So this is the paper that you're going to use for the clay. You're not going to use actual printer paper. And the recipe from ultimatepapermache.com gives you gram measurements of everything. So gram measurements of dry toilet paper. After you add water, it even gives you the grams of wet toilet paper that you're supposed to have. So you are going to put toilet paper in a bowl and then soak it in water, have it break apart, and then you're going to wring out the water from the toilet paper until you get the exact gram measurements that you need. And then you're going to add all-purpose joint compound. It can be anything. I also like this recipe because you don't have to use a specific brand, because you don't have to worry about it reacting negatively with glue, since you made glue out of flour, cornstarch, and everything else. And that means you can buy the most inexpensive joint compound you can find. Then I put my wet toilet paper, my glue mixture that we cooked earlier, and the joint compound in a bowl that you're not going to use again. You don't want to reuse any of the pots, pans, spatulas for other things other than making projects that you can't eat. And with a hand mixer, you are going to blend this up until it is as smooth as you can get it. So I think I blended mine up for maybe like 2 minutes. You're gradually going to add cornstarch. And again, exact measurements are going to be on the Ultimate Paper Mache website. And I will link that in my bio below. There's going to be a point where your mixture is going to get too tough for your beaters. You don't want your hand mixer's motor to blow out. So when you see the mixture start to climb up the beaters, you're going to want to turn that off and start mixing by hand. I try to use gloves because that's probably safe. You maybe don't want joint compounds all over your hands, but at the end of the day, it is a lot easier with just my bare hands. Don't do what I do as I say, and maybe be as cautious as you can. Wear gloves or mix with a spatula. It'll probably just take longer, but you'll get there. And once you get to the consistency you like, I do like mine a little bit stiffer. This is what you'll end up with. And you do want to store these in an airtight container or a Ziploc bag, which is what I did. I ended up making 3 batches of this clay to make this entire sculpture. And time for sculpting. I had a blast with this. I really felt so relaxed. This was just for me to have fun. But I did have the reference photo next to me, and I tried to get it as close to the reference as possible, as in my design. So I started with getting the silhouette right. I wanted to have the shapes be exactly what I drew on my iPad. And then from there, I just had fun with it. I didn't use that many references. The references that I did use, I will pop up on the screen now, and it was mostly for the eyes, but I did want this to just be a fun project for myself. Again, it wasn't a very serious character design session. I just wanted to bring a little bit of whimsy and personality to these pumpkins. So every time I sculpt characters or design characters, I really am thinking about their personalities. This giant one on the bottom is kind of like a derpy character, kind of like an awkward guy. My husband named him Morton. The middle guy is kind of just like a scared, wimpy, almost pimply, awkward guy. I think my husband named him Ridley. And then the top pumpkin, I wanted to make kind of like the evil guy. But because he's the smallest one, I wanted him to feel kind of like Napoleon complex-y. So I made him look like the most sinister one. But still, when they are stacked on top of each other, they still kind of look like they're from the same world. And I am happy with what I ended up with. But there are a couple things to know about this clay. This clay is an air dry clay, and this is one of I think the second time I've worked with it. Maybe it would be worthwhile to try a paper mache recipe with glue if you are going to work on top of plastic pumpkins. And here's why. Because the pumpkins are shaped in such a round way, and the paper mache clay is so rigid and even shrinks a little bit when it dries, it may lift off of your plastic pumpkin. Something that might help in the future to help that clay stick is maybe sanding your pumpkin to have a rough surface for the clay to stick to a little bit better. But what I found worked out for me was not putting a thin layer of paper mache clay on the pumpkin. The thicker it seemed, the better to stick at the end. But I still did have clay on the edges lifting, and here is what I did to fix it. First, I let these pumpkins dry overnight So for the pieces that did start to lift a little bit, like this cracked piece you see here, I decided to seal the edges with leftover wood glue that I had. You can also probably use Mod Podge, but the reason I used wood glue is because when it dries, it is very flexible still. That's kind of the problem that I was having, was the clay was being too rigid and the pumpkin is pretty round. So I needed something to be a little bit more flexible. The wood glue also dried super fast and it made it extremely solid. It almost made it a rubbery finish or a plasticky finish, which went well with the overall plastic material underneath. So I just took my time to seal all of these pumpkins in wood glue, and when I ran out, I did use Mod Podge. Just use what you have. And the dreaded part for me, because I'm bad at it, as I've mentioned endless times, is the painting portion. Something that I don't know if I would do again was painting the base of these pumpkins all black. I did do that for a reason. Tim Burton's characters are pretty dark, and they, at least their character designs, are very inky, like these from Carlos Grangel, these from Corpse Bride. And I wanted mine to look like that, and give kind of like a sketchy, inky, dirty, dark feel. So I thought coating it in black underneath so that it would peek out would help. I don't know how necessary it was to paint the entire pumpkins black. I don't think I needed to do that. I think I just needed to maybe paint the eyes, and kind of where the creases are black. Because as you'll see as we move forward, when I painted the base colors of the pumpkin, a little bit too much of the black showed up and it looked very, very muddy. Especially given the organic, rough texture of the paper mache clay, you're not going to get a very smooth finish on top of the clay at the end. Unless you sand it, of course, but I couldn't sand it in this case because it would have just fallen off my plastic pumpkin. So my paint did end up being very muddy. But I took that and I tried to lean with it. Tim Burton's characters are all pretty spooky, grungy, dirty, and like essentially black as a base coat. So I just kept going. I wanted the bottom pumpkin to be a light blue with purple and green accents. I can't really give a good explanation of why I chose the colors I did and what techniques I used because I didn't really have techniques. Again, I don't really know how to paint. That's something that I need to tackle later on to figure out how to do. So I just went with it. I focused primarily on their expressions. I wanted this guy to have a very worried expression. Something I did do on all of them was add kind of black lines around their eyes, around their mouth, around the cracks of where I wanted the pumpkin to go to give it a more graphic look. Tim Burton-esque look, if you will. And this is what I ended up with after the paint job. You know, it's not too bad. I did have fun all the way through. I guess that's all that matters. It isn't exactly what I envisioned in my brain, but it's still pretty good. I think I stayed true to my sketch. And speaking of my sketch, there is one last thing to do, and it is to work on the top pumpkin's stem. For this, I brought out my drill to drill a hole at the top of the pumpkin, just big enough to fit some armature wire. I bent the armature wire to match the sketch that I had, and I glued that in place with some hot glue. And this next thing I did, I kind of did on the whim. I didn't know what I wanted to use for the stem. At this point, I ran out of paper mache clay. I didn't know if I wanted to make a batch, especially because with this clay, you can't get smooth detail, and I wanted this stem to kind of look like it's spindly or kind of like a rope where it twists upon each other. So I did do something that I wouldn't recommend you do if you wanted to keep this piece for years to come. I went in with hot glue at the end to make a base. Kind of the same way I would do for a sculpture with foil. I kind of just used hot glue and made the initial shape of the stem that I wanted. I built the hot glue on top, and here's the part that I don't recommend you do. I went in with oil-based clay, a clay that never dries, and ended up just sealing it with some polyurethane coating on the top. I don't know if you're able to do this and how long it'll last. I'll let you know. It feels pretty solid right now, but if you did want to keep this years to come, what I would recommend is using something like an epoxy sculpt, a 2-part clay that dries rock hard like a resin. But again, I wanted to use what I had. So I used my oil-based clay, and I thought it worked out pretty well to get the shape and look that I wanted, the kind of whimsical stem that you would maybe see in Nightmare Before Christmas. This is it after spraying on the polyurethane top coat. And then I went in with some black paint, a little bit of brown paint, and I wasn't fussing with it too much and just kind of got it to a place where it looked like it matched that green pumpkin. And I did add some finishing touches after I stacked the pumpkins on top of each other. I did glue them in place. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to do that. I added more of my oil-based clay to the back to kind of make the stem look like it's wrapping around the pumpkin itself. And I took some fake leaves that I had laying around and had that wrapping around the pumpkin itself as well. And last but not least, I didn't think that the leaves that I had matched the pumpkin, so I did go over it with a little bit of paint to darken it up and to make it feel like it's from the same world. And this is the final result. I love it. I had so much fun, and I think that's why I love it so much. I was not confined with the pressures of wanting this to be a stellar design. I kind of just wanted it to be whimsical and to show you that you don't need to spend so much money to make cool things. Anyway, happy start to your Halloween season. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you all have fun and create fun things to celebrate the season. I'll see you in the next one.